This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Hey, hey.
Happy President's Day, everybody. Actually, we're releasing this. Happy birthday, Bryan. We're releasing this on your birthday.
Oh,
Happy
well,
birthday.
thank you. Yes, yes. Yes. The big, what am I? What?
You have more years than there are cards in a deck, Bryan.
Celebrating 206. Yes, that's us. Welcome back to Dream Idiots, folks, and thanks for joining us yet again.
Yeah, for episode 107. You can get us at all kinds of places. You can find us on various podcatchers of your choice. You can pass us along to your friends, your enemies, your relatives, your coworkers. You can also find us on 101.5 KXEP in San Antonio on Tuesday afternoons and Friday afternoons at 5 o'clock. Is that correct, Bryan? That is now our
That is true. Those are our confirmed time slots going forward. So new episodes on, I think the newer episodes on Fridays, and the stuff from the Wayback Machine on Tuesdays, I believe. And they're kind of slicing and dicing them a little bit as they see fit and taking out the naughty words. So
taking out the naughty words and the nonsensical stuff like my college quizzes for Bryan. Probably all the quizzes
right.
are going to go.
Yeah.
And
Yes. Some of the sillier stuff, like I would think they're not going to use, but they can if they want.
yeah, they are more than welcome to. So,
Yes.
um,
Yeah, check us out. It's dreamidiots.com. Facebook and Instagram, we're at Dream Idiots. Drop us a line if you want to. Dream Idiots podcast at Gmail. If you got a story idea, got a curse word you'd like us to cover, just want to reach out and tell us that your life now has meaning, that you found our podcast, that would be great. And you can actually listen to the audio for free if you want on patreon.com/Dream Idiots, and actually posting the video from our podcast there as well if you want to pay a tiny bit. That's cool too.
the only update I have is something you and I just discussed, and that is 100 a panel of 154 historians got together and rated the U.S. presidents 1 through 45,
Huh.
not counting who was it, Chester A. Arthur. Was it Chester A. Arthur? Who was it? Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland, who had 2 terms. So they ranked 1 through 45. So you can look that up anywhere. Check it out. See who's number 1, who's number 45. Some of it may surprise you. Most of it probably won't. But it was interesting fodder for President's Day here. Since we are recording on a Monday, which I just remembered as I was about halfway out to my mailbox. There's no mail. All right. It is 107, which means you get to go first, Bryan. What you got for us?
All right. So this is a story titled Sleeping Lady with Black Vase. So this is not really a three-parter, but this is the first story that I'm going to tell about crime or possible crime related to the art world. So I know that you are a person who likes watching TV and you watch movies. You ingest various types of media. It stands to reason that there have been times in the past when you've been watching TV and you've done a double take because there is a piece of music in the background that you recognize, or maybe it's even on the soundtrack that is an artist you like that is maybe a little bit more obscure, not in the mainstream. I recently heard a "They Might Be Giants" song kind of playing as background music in a scene in a TV show. I'm like, wow, that's somewhat unusual, and stood out to me. Or you might also see a backdrop that you recognize because a TV show or movie is being shot in a location where you've been before, and so then you're distracted by the background. And another example of this. This happened to me on several occasions where I've been watching something and just notice in passing that there is a piece of artwork or something that is in the scene that I recognize as part of the set. And we're not talking about things that would be very common, like Edward Hopper's the diner
Nighthawks at the
scene.
Diner.
Yes, or the Mona Lisa, or the Scream, Edvard Munch's Scream. Pieces like that. They're sort of more known, but we all have our own personal esoteric tastes, and so I like sort of Southwest art. Occasionally, I've seen a Georgia O'Keeffe painting, as you see behind me right now. Things like that. I believe we have a person in common that is a extended member of your family that has a degree in art history. That watching movies must drive him mad, because I'm sure he can pick out all the things that are part of the set. If it's known, if it was done by a known artist of any stripe, I'm sure he can name them all. So I'm mentioning that as just a general type of behavior that we all probably engage in on a low level, subconscious level, kind of at all times. So I'm just mentioning that now, but we're going to come back to that. We're going to talk briefly about an artist named, I believe it's pronounced Robert Barani. In doing research for this, I actually listened to a couple articles that had an audio component, and one of them, I'm making fun of NPR here a little bit, because in the audio broadcast of the story, he was referred to as Robert Barani, which good old Bob Barani. I guarantee you that's not right. So I believe Barani is, I'm sorry, Baronet is the right pronunciation of his last name. He's born in Budapest, Hungary, in 1887, and he's pretty much an artist essentially for birth. He's born into a Jewish family, at least a partly Jewish family, and at a very early age, very early 1900s, he travels to Paris, and he's studying art at the Académie Julienne, and he is pretty much immediately rubbing elbows with a bunch of famous people. He exhibits alongside Matisse. He becomes good friends with Gertrude Stein. He is influenced heavily by the work of Paul Cézanne, and he, after his time there, returns to Budapest, and he has all this newfound insight and inspiration from these artists, and a small burgeoning artist community grows in Budapest. And there's a collection of artists known as the Eight. And I'm not even going to attempt the pronunciations of these 8 artists, but they are all generally impressionists, inspired by cubists a little bit, not as severe as the style of Picasso, but there is an artist community, and there is demand for these artists' work, or at least they're probably not wealthy, but they're all making money, and they're living, making their way in the world as artists. In 1920, Bernet, along with a whole host of citizens, have to flee their homeland for a short period of time, because there is, for about 4.5 months there, Hungary is communist, but the communist state collapses. But during this time, he is in Berlin. He, at first, it is alleged anyway, he's very busy during his 5 months in Berlin. He has an affair with Marlene Dietrich.
Oh my!
But then also manages to have an affair with Princess Anastasia, the daughter of Tsar Nicholas II. But even still, during these 5 months, he meets his second wife, a woman named Edda Brewer. She's a musician, she's a cellist, and she would become his muse. So Baronet just starts painting Edda constantly, obsessively, repeatedly. And she is in a very, very large number of his paintings. His style is it is avant-garde. Again, it's cubist, but not in an extreme sense of the word. But his paintings have sort of very simple lines. They become very, very popular. They're in demand. They're fashionable. They have these really close, sort of intimate feel to them. I actually sent you, before we started, that one painting. Do you have any impressions of it?
Cubist is what came to mind for me, but then I dismissed that because it wasn't cubist looking enough. But yeah, I mean, I certainly see that. It is very simple. this is where you tell me it's AI generated and you're all blowing smoke up my.
No, 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 it's not.
Um, the woman appears to have, I don't know when this was painted, but she seems to have a short haircut, which is interesting. She's kind of laying like horizontally across the frame, like northeast to southwest, I guess you would say. Um, it's very angular, but it is very simple. It's I didn't know how to feel about it at first, but it is a very cozy picture, I guess you would call it.
Yeah.
It's quite simple. It's got a very earthy palette, with the exception of kind of a shock of blue right in the middle, which looks to be her cuffs and perhaps her dress. It's kind of hard to tell, but she's got like a gray, almost, what's that called? A dirndl, that German dress.
Hmm.
Um, but very gray, kind of nondescript smock type outfit. And then this kind of shock of tealish blue right in the middle, surrounded by blacks and grays and a little bit of beige
Yeah,
and tan.
yeah, it is very dark, but it is very simple. And weirdly, when I first saw it, it seems, this is entirely not correct to say this, but it seems very mid-century modern to me, kind of, just in its sort of simplicity. But I'm first to admit that I know nothing about art, and so anyone out there listening to this that does, you're now free to mock me for my for my commentary. So 1926 rolls around, and Robert and Etta move back to Budapest again, and he stays there pretty much for the rest of his life. In 1941, those pesky Nazis, the more I hear about them, the less I like, come through this part of the world, and he's Jewish. He goes into hiding during the war with his family. His studio space is allegedly destroyed, may or may not have been destroyed, along with large amounts of his work. But the war ends, and he goes to work after the war as a teacher at the Hungarian University of Fine Arts, and he passes away in 1953. So that's kind of a snapshot of his life. During his life, he was, may not be accurate to say he was a prolific painter, but he did paint very consistently. And as I said, he made a living at it. Sleeping Lady with Black Vase. There's not tons known about this painting. It's likely it was painted in 1927 or 28. That is definitely his wife. Seems clear that it was painted in their home. It was exhibited on a few occasions, and it was last known to have been shown at the National Salon. And this exhibition was run by something, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation as well. I believe it's Munkaksi, Munkaksy, Munkaksy Guild.
That's pronounced Smith, actually.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
So 1928, the painting vanishes. There is no indication that it was sold at this exhibition. There's no indication that it was shipped anywhere. There's no indication of anything. It just goes poof. And then, so from 27 or so to 1941, it's not known where it is. Presumably it's on the wall somewhere. But 1941 is when his atelier and all of his work is destroyed, or may not have been destroyed by the Nazis. So we're going to move forward here quite a ways, all the way up to 2009. Sleeping Lady with Black Vase. No one knows this artist. No one knows this individual painting, but it is Christmas in 2009, and there is a man named Gergi Barki, Barki. He is a art historian and researcher at the Hungarian National Gallery. And it's Christmas time. He's going to sit down and he's going to watch a movie with his daughter named Lola. And they fire up a movie which I have seen, but not in a million years. Stuart Little.
Hmm.
And she is sitting next to him. They're watching through Stuart Little. And I can only imagine that Barkey kind of freezes in his tracks, because he looks up and there's a scene with Gina Davis and Hugh Laurie, but behind them, sitting, hanging over the mantle on the set of this movie is what appears to be sleeping lady with black vase. And I can only imagine. So 2009, this is certainly in the era of DVDs. Him pausing it, rewinding, hitting play again, rewinding, hitting play, rewinding, hitting play. There are a few other apparently scenes in this room where you can see the painting again. The only reason Barkey is suspicious of this is even though the painting did vanish in 1927, Barkey has actually seen a black and white photo of the painting, maybe the only photo of the painting for all I know. It doesn't mention this in the research. But when he sees it, he realizes that this guy is way too obscure, and this particular piece of artwork is way too obscure for someone to have bothered to commission a recreation of it. No one's going to make this. And obviously this is a jillion years before color copying or any sort of reproduction could have been done. So that's very common now. If you're watching the video of this, you can see I have a Georgia O'Keeffe print behind my head. No one's going to watch this and think, wow, that podcaster owns that Georgia O'Keeffe painting. No, I don't. So Barkey sees this. He says later, quote, "I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw Berani's long lost masterpiece on a wall behind Hugh Laurie. A researcher can never take his eyes off the job, even when watching Christmas movies at home." So Barkey then immediately he goes into overdrive here because he wants to find an answer to this question. And he starts contacting. I presume he goes on IMDb where he looks at the closing credits of this movie to track down the names of everyone he can find that might have any title that's related to art direction or set decoration
props,
or anything.
Anything, yeah.
Right. Like so who the hundreds of people that are involved in this. 2 years passed, no reply to any of it. Finally, he does get a response to his email after emailing who knows how many folks. And he gets a reply from the assistant of the set designer on Stuart Little. And she says to him that after the movie wrapped up, she actually bought the painting from the studio for the change in her sofa. And the painting is now hanging in her apartment in Washington, D.C. So she then tells him that she had originally purchased the painting for $500. She'd found it in an antique shop in Pasadena, California, and she didn't know what she had. She just thought it would be a great fit for this set. After Stuart Little wraps, I mean, she actually sells the artwork originally to the studio. The studio makes Stuart Little. The studio then also uses the artwork on a few different soap operas, and so the painting makes its way around. But after a certain period of time, the artist actually buys it back, so she now owns it. It's on the wall in her house or in her apartment. So a year after this initial contact, Barkey actually travels to meet her in Washington, D.C. So he travels all the way there. For some reason, they meet up in a park near a hot dog stand because, of course, that's where you go to look at art. I don't understand why that would like whatever. So Barkey tells her the whole backstory about the painting and what happened to it, or what the fact that it's been missing for whatever 80 plus years. And so, but he still needs to confirm that it's authentic. He has a screwdriver and turns the painting over, and he's able to unscrew. There's some backing to the frame, and underneath the backing, he finds a stamp that reads 1928 and reads Monkaski Guild, the entity that had exhibited it in 1928. So now it's very clear this is the missing painting. It's there's no way.
What do they call that in art? The Providence.
The Providence, exactly.
Providence, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he finds it. Eventually, it did actually make its way back to Hungary. The assistant sold the painting to a collector, who then took it back to Budapest. And in December of 2014, it sold at auction for just under $286,000. I'm sure now it's probably much more famous for being in Stuart Little than because of who it originally was painted by. But and I don't quite understand who would have gotten that money. Hopefully that money somehow went to this artist's, Berenice's great niece, great niece. So, I don't know. That's a boatload of money to have gone to a collector or have gone to some exhibition. That's sort of robbery in my mind, but oh well. So it is back, in Hungary. The question still remains though, how did this thing get from Budapest 1927, 1928 all the way to a movie set in California? The first theory is pretty straightforward. 1941, when the Nazis come through, I mean, there are jillions and jillions of cases where, valuables and art and furniture and musical instruments and anything that can be absconded with by the Nazis were sold off or destroyed or who knows what. And so first theory is Nazis think they have something that they either like and they want to collect themselves to put in their palatial homes, etc. So or they sold it off somehow. The second theory is Bernier and Edda did have one child, a daughter named Anna, who did somehow during or right after World War II make it to the United States, and somehow her mother smuggled this painting out. But this doesn't really make a lot of sense because Anna apparently lived in poverty in the U.S. So if she had the painting and it was worth anything, she probably would have sold it. But hard to know if that's true or not. The one that Barkey seems to think is the most likely is that during that exhibition by the Munkaksi Guild in 28, it probably was sold. The buyer was probably Jewish. And then as the Nazis are spreading out, this family flees for obvious reasons and makes it to North America and takes the painting with them. And at some point during those intervening 70, 80 years, someone doesn't know what it is. It winds up in a closet somewhere. And when it winds up at this charity place, the only thing Barkey's able to find out for sure is that an art collector, a guy named Michael Hempstead, finds it in a Saint Vincent de Paul auction house. I know there's at least one Saint Vincent de Paul in Austin. There might be one in San Antonio as well. It's basically
one in Houston. Yeah,
it's basically the Catholic Goodwill where you can you're purging stuff and you just drop off donations. So this guy finds it. I mean, he's an art collector, so he may have known from the get-go what he had. He pays $40 for it, takes it home. Immediately, at some point shortly thereafter, resells it because Bernays paintings are selling for $400 or $500. He gets a few $100 for it at the antique shop, and then the set designer buys it there. But there's still a decades long gap there with who the hell knows where this thing was. Presumably it was on someone's wall somewhere, but who the hell knows? Anyway, it's back in Hungary now,
where it should be.
Right.
That's an incredible story. And I mean, depending on if it did indeed come in with a family, you assume that maybe they came in through New York, but if they had relatives here in the States, they could have gone anywhere. They could have gone to Chicago. They could have gone
right
directly to California if they had family here to live with. So, wow. I mean, that's a fascinating.
Yeah, pretty cool.
That's incredible.
I mean, hopefully the money went to, hopefully his heirs got some of that money. You'd think, but still, especially because again, all you have to do is Google Nazi theft art, and if you can find just all these stories about where countless families across all of Europe have God, it's insane. Among all the other insane things they did this too. But special thanks to Priceless Blog was my main source on this. And if you have some time to go check that out. I'm gonna bring it up here again to make sure I'm giving the exact pricelessblog.squarespace.com. I was actually corresponding with the woman who runs this site. She started this site during COVID as a sort of a intellectual exercise to write about art and mysteries and true crime. And so she's been writing articles since COVID. And there's lots of other cool stories on her website, pricelessblog.squarespace.com.
Oh, that's great. Very interesting story. And once again, we are not a true crime podcast, but occasionally we dip our toes in that water.
Yeah, it's not.
It's
It's
awesome.
not really the murderous blood fest that so many of those podcasts seem to be.
No, but
Which I
that
listen
is
to, I admit, but I listen to some of
well,
them.
so do I. No, art heists are, I don't want to say they're cool, but the stories behind them are just, I mean, what kind of life did that piece of art live for 70 years, right? I mean,
right.
um, very cool. Thank you, Bryan. That is awesome.
It's time for the Dream Idiot's curse word of the week.
And before we move over to you, curse word of the week is protein spill. Protein spill.
I don't even want to take a shot in the dark on this one, Bryan. I have an idea, but I'm not going to do it.
You're not going to share? Yeah,
I am not.
Unfortunately, it's exactly what it sounds like. You are you're a teenager and you're running the roller coaster at a theme park, and you need some, or at a grocery store, and you need a mop, clean up on aisle 3. There's a protein spill. It's just any body function. It's the euphemism for any body function, basically.
That's okay.
That's disgusting, but funny.
That's more general than I thought it was going to be, but that's
well, I made it
okay.
I made it a little less gross.
A little less gross. Thank you. Protein spill. Okay. On that note, you ready? You ready for mine?
Go.
Here we go. In honor of President's Day.
Uh-oh.
On November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy gave a speech at the Dallas Trade Mart, or at least he would have, had his route through Dealey Plaza in downtown Dallas earlier that day not taken him directly into the paths of an assassin or assassin's bullets. Today's story is about the speech Kennedy would have given that Friday afternoon. When one thinks of JFK's speeches, phrases ingrained from audio tapes or film clips, or for an increasingly smaller percentage of Americans every year, actual memories of real-time broadcasts on television or radio immediately leap to mind. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Or, we choose to go to the moon in this decade, that's how he said decade, in this decade, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Some phrases were written by Ted Sorensen, JFK's primary speechwriter, others by the president himself. And then there's the quick witticism JFK would throw in here and there. A priest, a rabbi, and a Texas Aggie walk into a bar. But with this speech, the audience for which was made up primarily of Dallas area businessmen, Kennedy had a difficult set of priorities. At the turn of the year, the president had enjoyed a 70% approval rating. But as 1963 progressed, that number ticked slowly downward, particularly in the South. The president's civil rights agenda had angered many white Southerners. Even though Barry Goldwater, who would become the Republican candidate for president in June of 1963, was some 40 points behind Kennedy, the president thought the November 1963 to Texas was necessary. In the upcoming 1964 election, Kennedy would most likely lose at least 47 electoral college votes across the Deep South. He could not afford to lose Texas's 25 votes, and that would be 38 votes as of the 2020 presidential election. Even the presence of his Texas-born running mate, Vice President Lyndon Johnson, wasn't enough to stem this concern. Let's take a word or two about Dallas of 1963. Socially and politically conservative might be the best way to describe the city, but we could go a bit further. From Stephen L. Davis of the American Prospect, quote, Dallas was the most singular city in America. It had become, without question, the roiling headquarters for the angry absolutist resistance to John F. Kennedy and his administration. A coterie of Kennedy haters congregated there, among them W.A. Criswell, senior pastor of the First Baptist Church of Dallas. You're going to love this guy, Bryan. Criswell was a segregationist who really disliked the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court ruling, the NAACP, and the National Council of Churches. A 1956 address made to a South Carolina evangelism conference and the South Carolina legislature was so ill-received, so publicly denounced, that he shut his pie hole about race relations for 10 years. He didn't like the idea of a Catholic being president either and was extremely vocal about that. He wrote an article titled Religious Freedom, the Church, the State, and Senator Kennedy, where he denounced the ability of a Catholic candidate to run for public office. His argument was of the, quote, beholden to the Vatican variety that I'm sure we're all familiar with. Also part of this group was Ted Dealey, the publisher of the Dallas Morning News. Dealey attended a luncheon for newspaper publishers held at the White House in October of 1961. President Kennedy asked if anyone present had any comments, and Dealey read from prepared statements. Quote, the general opinion of the grassroots thinking in this country is that you and your administration are weak sisters. If we stand firm, there will be no war. The Russians will back down. We need a man on horseback to lead this nation, and many people in Texas and the Southwest think that you are riding Caroline's tricycle. So, a man of great class dragging the president's 3-year-old daughter into the situation.
Right.
Any comments so far, Bryan, on the Reverend Criswell or Ted Dealey?
I mean, and that's, God bless Texas. That's par for the course. No surprise there.
No surprise at all.
No.
Have you ever heard of U.S. Army General Edwin Walker?
No.
Okay, let's talk about him. On April 10th of 1963, General Edwin Walker claimed a sniper made an attempt on his life. A window frame outside the study of his personal residence exploded when a bullet struck it late that spring evening. The bullet missed the general, but glass shards and wooden splinters injured his arm. In 1961, Walker had made history by becoming the only general to resign from the U.S. Armed Forces during the 20th century. It was a political statement. Walker believed, like Senator Joseph McCarthy before him, that communists had infiltrated the U.S. government, particularly the State Department. Walker labeled Harry Truman, the same Harry Truman, the president who authorized the use of atomic weapons in World War II, as, quote, pink. Eleanor Roosevelt and Secretary of State Dean Acheson also received this label from Walker. He attempted to use his position as general to sway the soldiers under his command to vote for right-wing candidates, usually through the use of John Birch Society literature. This was a clear violation of the Hatch Act. In October of 1962, Walker was arrested for encouraging riots at the University of Mississippi as a reaction to the admission of Black student James Meredith. All in all, Walker was a real peach. Walker liked to hang out with like-minded folks such as the aforementioned John Birch Society, the Minutemen, and the hilariously named National Indignation Convention. People who were just angry about stuff. In the November 22nd, 1963 edition of the Dallas Morning News, published by good old Ted Dealey, a black-bordered advertisement titled Wanted for Treason featured 2 photos of Kennedy, one in profile, one full-on, as well as a list of alleged offenses committed by him and his administration. This ad also appeared as handbills on Dallas streets the morning of the assassination. Then there was what happened to Adlai Stevenson. Walker was also involved in an early confrontation with Stevenson, who had served as United Nations ambassador from 1961 to 1965. Stevenson visited a number of U.S. cities during his tenure, giving lectures on the value of the United Nations around the world. One of the tour cities was Dallas, where on October 24, 1963, he received a less than warm reception. Protesters, organized primarily by Walker, greeted him. They booed and yelled and spit on him as well. One fine lady smacked him on the head with a protest sign. Stevenson declined to press charges, saying he would rather her, quote, go to school than go to jail. Stevenson would later regret meeting with only the president's advisors upon his return to Washington and not the president himself. He found Dallas, quote, ugly and frightening, end quote, and felt he should have told the president about the atmosphere there himself in person. So, like any good speechmaker, we now know the kind of audience that Kennedy was facing that day. He had a long way to go in approaching these folks. But there's no evidence that any of them were as far to the right as Walker, Criswell, or Dealey. Members of the Dallas Citizens Council were present, and members of the Dallas Assembly. These groups were comprised of, quote, local business and nonprofit leaders. The Graduate Research Center of the Southwest sent scholars. He had a very disparate audience and needed a unifying theme. He chose, quote, leadership and learning. He and Sorensen had hoped to address the, quote, fires of rage as evidenced by Walker and his cronies against his administration. He had to demarcate between, quote, dissident voices and those who, quote, knowingly promote and spread lies. And here I've got some lengthy quotes from his intended speech.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go ahead and read them. And then I thought we could discuss what we've heard and kind of pick them apart.
Right. Okay.
This comes basically from a book by a guy named Jeff Nussbaum, a great book called Undelivered, the Never Heard Speeches That Would Have Rewritten History, a terrific book. I'm going to pull from this 2 more times this year for 2 entirely different speeches. Here we go. I'm going to do the thing where I start off in Kennedy's voice and then fade into my own voice like they do in movies. But today, other voices are heard in the land, voices preaching doctrines wholly unrelated to reality, wholly unsuited to the 60s, doctrines which apparently assume that words will suffice without weapons, that vituperations are as good as victory, and that peace is a sign of weakness. At a time when the national debt is steadily being reduced in terms of its burden on our economy, they see that debt as the greatest threat to our security. At a time when we are steadily reducing the number of federal employees serving every 1,000 citizens, they fear those supposed hordes of civil servants far more than the actual hordes of opposing armies. What do you think of that?
Well, in 2024, unfortunately, it's entirely too wordy. I mean, I personally, I love it. Obviously, it's spot on. The more things change, the more things stay the same. I mean, it's the same Dunning-Kruger crap that we're dealing with now, essentially, right? People have their, once people have allowed themselves to be duped by false information that they ingrain in their DNA, they won't relent. And so, of course, even then there are those on the right who believe things that were nonsensical and irrational, but they believed them anyway because, these are, it was part of an ideology that was being furthered by those on the right. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It's in furtherance of our goal.
And it also speaks to this ignorance about, we don't need this much bureaucracy. Yeah, but bureaucrats who are there regardless of political affiliation and have no political affiliation one way or the other, good bureaucrats can make a big system work.
Right.
Right? I mean,
right.
That's what happens when you gut the State Department. When there's no one left to do the things that have to get done. Things stop working. Things fall apart.
Yeah, I mean, there is a large part of what government does is just the nuts and bolts of making the train move, right?
Yep. Continuing. Ignorance and misinformation can handicap the progress of a city or company, but they can, if allowed to prevail in foreign policy, handicap this country's security. In a role of complex and continuing problems, in a world full of frustrations and irritations, America's leadership must be guided by the lights of learning and reason, or else those who confuse rhetoric with reality and the plausible with the possible will gain the popular ascendancy with their seemingly swift and simple solutions to every world problem.
Wow, that one sounds.
There's a lot there, huh?
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, it's like, wait, what? Carry the one. Trying to do the math on that one.
Well, first of all, what he does nicely is he compares a city to a company. So he's trying to speak to the businessmen who are there, right? He's trying to say, if you have integrated information, doesn't matter if you're running a city, a company, or a nation, you are going to hurt yourself through ignorance and misinformation, right? No matter what you're running. And if you take that out to a macro level to foreign policy, you're going to hamper the security of this country, say by storing documents in a bathroom in your hotel, right?
Wait, who do you mean?
Well, it's like he had a crystal ball, right? And this whole idea of a complex and continuing problems in a world full of frustrations and irritations, I kind of like the way he puts that, because when I see people out here, we Americans have had it. and I see it on a brand new SUV, it's like, with what? You are driving a brand new car. What is it that is being taken from you
Right.
at this moment that makes your life so effing horrible? What is it? Exactly.
Right. I have to look at Taylor Swift for 45 seconds during the Super Bowl.
We must be guided by the lights of learning and reason. Well, we don't want to trust
That's
people with learning and reason anymore.
Yeah, fairies. Come on.
They will gain popular ascendancy with their seemingly swift and simple solutions to every world problem. Well, damn it, let's get rid of NATO because there are some companies not paying 2% of their GDP to the coffers of NATO. And what has NATO done for us, really, except keep the peace in Europe for 70 plus years? Right? The best structured institution in the 20th century, NATO. Okay. It is the final lines of this speech which are perhaps best remembered. Kennedy's planned closing pulls together religious and civic threads, and I personally think it's brilliant. We in this country, in this generation, are by destiny, rather than choice, the watchmen on the walls of world's freedom. We ask, therefore, that we may be worthy of our power and responsibility, that we may exercise our strength with wisdom and restraint, and that we may achieve in our time and for all time the ancient vision of peace on earth, goodwill towards men. That must always be our goal, and the righteousness of our cause must always underlie our strength. For as written long ago, except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh, but in vain. That's from Psalm 123.
Mm-hmm.
A brilliant way to end the speech, demonstrating that Irish Catholic boy could quote scripture with the best of them, right? By destiny rather than choice. I mean, that's something that resonated with the Shining City on the Hill speech, right? Which would come, what, 20 years later?
25, yeah. Mm-hmm.
When did Reagan give that speech? But really pulling into this idea of the power and the responsibility coming down to us because not because we're choosing to do it, because we have to do it, because it's what we're meant to do. Hell of a way to wrap up that speech.
Right.
In my opinion. Let's talk about the remainders. Adlai Stevenson served as the UN ambassador until his death of a heart attack in 1965. Today, he is praised for his intellect, demeanor, and commitment to public service. Arthur Schlesinger said of him, he turned the Democratic Party around in the 1950s and made JFK possible. W.A. Criswell became president of the Southern Baptist Convention in 1968 and publicly called for racial equality in the Baptist Church. Who knows? Maybe he had a turnaround. Don't know. He died in Dallas at the age of 92 in 2002. Ted Dealey died of a heart attack in Dallas on November 27th, 1969, at the age of 77. The plaza in Dallas, incidentally, was named after his father, George, who was everything his son wasn't. The Warren Commission, based primarily on the testimony of Lee Harvey Oswald's widow, Marina, and physical evidence, concluded that Oswald was the would-be sniper that night at Walker's house in April of 1963. Few people.
Wait, Oswald was what now?
Oswald was the guy that shot at Walker.
Shot Walker?
That's what. Yep.
Wow.
Because he was such a fascist.
I've never heard that before. I didn't know that at all.
Yeah, that's been hanging out there for quite a while. At least that's what the Warren Commission. They think that they're fairly sure that the same bullet type was used, a Western cartridge was used, both the assassination and the attempted assassination of Walker. Walker celebrated the pending United States bicentennial by being charged with public lewdness on June 23rd, 1976. God bless America.
Happy birthday, America.
On June 23rd, 1976. So what, 13 days before the 13 days before the bicentennial, he had fondled and propositioned an undercover policeman in a public park restroom in Dallas. He was charged with public lewdness again in March of 1977.
Oh, say, sorry. I was gonna offer the the soundscape
He
behind you while you spoke.
he died in Dallas on Halloween night, 1993, at the age of 83, pretty much unloved and unmourned. Walker lives on, however, in screenings of John Frankenheimer's 1964 film 7 Days in May as the character played by Burt Lancaster, Air Force General James Mattoon, who's allegedly based on him. Another 1964 film, Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove,
Mhm.
has Air Force General Jack D. Ripper, played by Sterling Hayden, who is also based on Walker. Also, you may have heard at some point in your readings about Kennedy that Richard Nixon was in Dallas the day Kennedy was assassinated. That's true, he was. He left on a flight from Love Field an hour before the president's flight arrived from Fort Worth. Nixon had attended and I don't know why I find this so damn funny, the quote, annual convention of the American Bottlers of Carbonated Beverages Convention. He was present in his capacity as an attorney for the Pepsi-Cola Corporation. He did meet with reporters the night before and offered a, quote, vigorous critique of the Kennedy White House policies. And as a final note, I first learned of this speech and of Nixon's presence in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, after reading issue 11 of Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' comic masterpiece Watchmen in August of 1987 when I was in high school. The title for that comic was taken from Kennedy's intended speech. Yay, comic books. Sources for this were Stephen L. Davis's November 14, 2013 article on the American Prospect website, The Radicalism of Dallas, 1963. Peter Elkin's July 1985 article from Texas Monthly Online, The Legacy of Citizen Robert. Jeff Nussbaum's excellent 2022 Kindle edition of his book from Flatiron Books in New York, Undelivered, the never heard speeches that would have rewritten history. The NixonFoundation.org, an article from November 9th of 2013, Richard Nixon and November 22nd, 1963, and Wikipedia for basic info on W.A. Criswell and Ted Dealey. And that is the story of the speech that Kennedy never got to give at the Dallas Street Mart.
Yeah, good old Texas. We'd love to bring up the rear, don't we?
Well,
we're not as bad as Mississippi. Wait.
I think it just goes to show what a hell of a speech writing crew that he had, particularly Ted Sorensen.
Mm-hmm.
Those dudes could write speeches. I mean, those were
yeah.
Taking nothing away from who's around today.
Craftsmanship, right?
Those guys could write. And that's kind of what I like. I was having a talk with one of my kids who's having a rough time with a lot of the things that are going on in the world, particularly the Middle East. And he's like a lot of people are disappointed that he's having to choose between two old white men for president. And I said, well, just remember this: if you're having a tough time, one of the old white men is going to surround himself with people just like him. The other one is going to surround himself with people just like him who are good people and can do their jobs. That's the main difference. The Kennedy administration had so many smart, intelligent people working for them. And, good administrations have good people, smart people working for the American people. And that's what separates me, in my mind, at least, a good administration from bad administration.
Right. And there are numerous books. I mean, there's a book by, I think it's Doris Kearns, good one about Abraham Lincoln, about his cabinet and his administration was much the same. It wasn't about party. It was about capabilities and having the intellectual capacity and the desire. It wasn't just about politics and gamesmanship and ego. So yeah.
The Best of Enemies, I think, is the name of that one. I think something like that. Is that right? Team of Enemies, or
something like that. Yeah. Cabinet. I don't know. Doris
the
Kearns, good one.
The night the lights went out in Georgia. I don't know.
Empire Strikes Back. Something. I don't know.
Anyway. Yeah, there are some of the Kennedy speeches that just absolutely make me just I don't cry, but that lower lip starts to, do that
Yep.
kind of thing a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah, the why do we go to the moon speech is anyway.
And he was in San Antonio the day before, I
And
believe.
we know someone personally who shook hands with him that day.
Your father?
No.
Who?
No, my father didn't shake hands with him.
No.
We know someone who was
shook hands with him in San Antonio.
He was a little bitty 2 days before he died. Yeah. Because he was in San Antonio on, I believe, the 21st, and they flew to Fort Worth. I'll tell you off, Mike, because I'm not sure he wants that. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a cool story.
Okay. This does remind me that there is a story I have in the queue, which is going to be hard to put together, but I'm working on it. But kind of involving good old Lee Harvey and random shootings of people's houses and Kennedy, etc. The story I've told you a little bit about.
Yep.
My friend who had bullets aimed at his house. Working on that for one day, but there's a lot of work involved in that one. So yeah, but super cool story, fascinating stuff.
Alrighty, folks.
Thanks for listening.
Missing art, unheard speeches,
Mm.
horrific curse word of the week.
And this was not really idiotic at all. I feel like we've lowered the bar or something. This was almost cerebral, which is not like us.
107 episodes for us to get to an Aggie joke too, and it really wasn't a joke about Aggies. All right.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, folks. Please check us out online. Give us 5 stars on whichever platform you're on. Give us a review. That would be hugely helpful according to the algorithms and how they work. That helps us somehow. I don't really understand why. Drop us a line, dreamidiots@gmail.com, Facebook, Instagram. We are at Dream Idiots, and check us out at dreamidiots.com. We got boatloads more stuff coming soon.
It only gets weirder from here. Be good to each other.
This is a Rough Tiger production.
Bong bong.
Mm-hmm.
Bryan.
Bong bong?
Bong bong.
Bong bong. Good.